My name's Lila. I've always been the kind of person who prefers code to cocktails, a quiet evening over a raucous party. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the unexpected. That night at the party, hosted by a friend from college, was supposed to be another routine social gathering. I was already planning my escape route to my cozy apartment and my awaiting laptop when he walked in. David was hard to miss. At 22, he had the kind of energy that filled up a room. With his athlete's build and an easy smile, he was surrounded by admirers the moment he stepped through the door. I tried to keep to my corner, nursing my drink and fiddling with my phone, but fate had other plans. "Hey, you're Lila, right?" His voice cut through the noise, pulling me back from my digital refuge. I looked up to find those intense eyes fixed on me. "Yeah, that's me. And you are?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "David Matthews, the rising hockey star everyone seemed to talk about." "David, I've heard a lot about you. You're the genius programmer at Turner Tech, right?" His grin was infectious, and I found myself smiling, despite my initial resolve to remain disinterested. Genius might be stretching it, but yeah, I work for an IT company, I said, trying to play it cool. David chuckled, pulling up a chair next to me, uninvited but not unwelcome. "So, what brings you to a party where you clearly wish you were anywhere else?" I shrugged, looking around at the bustling room. "Guess I was trying to be social. My friends keep telling me I need to get out more." "That's funny." David leaned in, his voice dropping to a playful whisper. "Because I've been trying to get out of these things too. Too much fake chatter." "You want to escape? Let's grab some real food, this party stuff is just fluff." I hesitated. This wasn't my usual style, but there was something about David that felt different, genuine. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he really saw me, not just the quiet girl in the corner. As we sneaked out of the party, the cool night air felt like a splash of clarity. We ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with greasy fries and endless coffee. David ordered the biggest burger on the menu for us to split, and I found myself sharing stories about coding mishaps and server crashes. David listened, really listened, nodding and asking questions that showed he got it, even if he didn't know a router from a modem. It was refreshing, talking to someone who didn't glaze over when I geeked out about technology. As the night turned into early morning, I realized that David wasn't just a hotshot athlete, he was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly down to earth. Maybe that's why when he suggested we do this again next Friday, I didn't think twice before saying yes. David and I had been the talk of our circle since he started courting me. Despite our age difference, with me being 32 and him only 22, there was something electric between us. Honestly, it was flattering to have someone so vibrant and full of promise by my side. The day David decided to introduce me to his mom, Susan, I was nervous. The moment we arrived, the look on her face said it all. It was like she had tasted something sour just seeing me. "So, you're Lila," Susan began, sizing me up as if I were an item at an auction. "David has told me very little about you, which I suppose isn't surprising." I tried to smile, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Susan." She barely touched my hand before pulling back. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss, apparently." As we sat in her meticulously decorated living room, the air thick with tension, Susan didn't waste any time. "David tells me you two are planning to marry. He's a professional athlete, on his way to becoming a star. And you, Lila, you're a programmer, correct? And quite a bit older than him." "Yes, I am a programmer," I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite her tone. "And yes, there's an age difference, but we love each other." Susan scoffed. "Love," she muttered under her breath. "David, she's 32. You're just 22. You should be thinking about your career, not settling down with someone who—" "Mom," David interrupted, his voice firm. "I love Lila. That's what matters to me. We're getting married." Susan's eyes narrowed. "You're blinded by infatuation. Think about your future, your contracts, your endorsements." This is a mistake. I felt a surge of defiance. I'm not here to argue, Susan. I came because David wanted us to meet. I respect your concern, but our decision to marry is ours to make. David nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. Exactly. We've talked this through, and we're serious. Lila's age, her job, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is how we feel about each other. Susan leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment before she spoke again. Well, it seems I can't convince my own son to think clearly. If you're going to be part of this family, Lila, I expect you to understand the pressures David will face. Can you handle that? Without dragging him down? Her words stung, but I held my gaze. I'm not here to drag anyone down, Susan. I support David fully, in his career and everything else. There was a pause, a heavy, uncomfortable silence, before Susan stood up abruptly. I need to think about this. David, you're welcome to stay for dinner. Lila, I think it's best if you leave now. David started to protest, but I stopped him. It's okay, David. Let's not make this harder. I'll go, but think about what I said, Susan. I'm not the enemy here. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy. David was thrilled too when I told him, and he immediately suggested we speed up our wedding plans. Let's not wait, Lila. Let's get married as soon as we can, he said, his eyes shining with excitement and a bit of urgency. The joy of our news, however, didn't quite extend to everyone. When David broke the news to his mom, Susan, her reaction was less than enthusiastic. You're what? Pregnant? This changes things, she muttered, clearly agitated by the unexpected twist. David tried to calm her down. Mom, this is good news. We're happy. Susan paced the room, her brows furrowed in thought, before she turned to face us with a stern look. Fine, but if you're going to do this, you're doing it on my terms. First, you two are signing a prenup. A prenup? I echoed, my stomach sinking. Yes, to ensure my son's future earnings in hockey are protected. He's going to be making millions, and we can't have any risks, Susan explained, her voice firm and non-negotiable. David looked at me, his expression apologetic. Lila, I know it's not ideal, but my mom has a point about protecting the career I'm building. It's just a formality. I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation settling in. Okay, what's the second condition? I asked, bracing myself. You need to show your commitment to this family, Lila. I want you to handle the initial mortgage payment for your new house, 50% up front. Susan's eyes were locked on mine, challenging me. I was stunned. 50%? That's a lot of money, Susan. David was quick to jump in. Mom, that's too much. Lila, we can figure something out. But I knew what I had to do. I called my dad later that day, explaining the situation and how much I needed. Without a moment's hesitation, he agreed. I'll help you, Lila. It's important you start your married life on stable ground, he said, transferring $200,000 to my account. With the financial and prenuptial conditions met, we moved forward with the wedding plans. The day arrived faster than I had anticipated, filled with a mix of emotions. Our wedding was beautiful, set in a quaint little chapel with flowers everywhere, and our closest friends and family gathered. I walked down the aisle, my heart full of love for David and our future together. My parents looked so proud and happy, their smiles beaming across the room. But there, off to the side, stood Susan with a look that could only be described as sour. Throughout the evening, her displeasure was evident. She wore a tight smile as guests congratulated her, her eyes often darting towards me with undisguised disapproval. Despite her attitude, David and I tried to focus on the positive. We mingled with guests, laughed, danced, and celebrated our union and the little life growing inside me. After the wedding, it didn't take long for life to take a sharp turn into the unexpected. Susan declared she'd be moving in with us, supposedly to help me through the early stages of pregnancy. I wasn't keen on the idea, but to avoid any drama, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know, this decision would soon transform my home into a battleground where peace was a rare commodity. Within weeks of moving in, Susan had taken over the house. It was subtle at first, a few items moved here and there, some new decorations. But soon, her presence and influence grew stronger, more invasive. She didn't do much in terms of actual housework or helping me. Instead, she spent her days shopping with the money David made from his hockey career, filling our already cozy home with lavish furniture and expensive clothes that reflected her taste, not ours. One afternoon, as I was trying to rearrange some of these new additions to make space for my own things, Susan walked in, her eyes scanning the room critically. "Lila, what are you doing? You're just moving things around without improving anything. You should focus more on resting and less on these useless activities," she snapped, her tone harsh and condescending. I bit my tongue, holding back my frustration. "I'm just trying to make some space, Susan. It's getting a bit crowded in here." "Crowded? This is quality, Lila. These are things a proper home should have. You should be thankful," she retorted, waving a dismissive hand at my simpler decorations. Feeling the sting of her words, I tried to keep my cool. "Susan, I appreciate your help around the house, but maybe we could tone down the shopping a bit. There's hardly space to move." Susan's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. "I'm only trying to bring some standard to this place. If you can't see that, it's not my problem. You should focus on what's important, like taking care of David." The remark hit harder than expected, and I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. This wasn't the home I had envisioned for us, filled with love and mutual respect, but rather, it was turning into a showcase of Susan's tastes and preferences. Later that evening, when David got home from practice, I decided it was time to discuss the living situation. "David, we need to talk about your mom," I started, my voice steady but filled with concern. "What about her?" He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat down. "She's taking over the house, David. And she's constantly criticizing me, making me feel like I'm not doing enough around here," I explained, hoping he'd understand. David's face hardened, and he sighed deeply. "Lila, she's just trying to help. You know how she is. She wants everything to be perfect. You should try to get along, show her some respect." As the days turned into weeks, Susan's dominance in our home grew. My attempts to reclaim some sense of normalcy or to assert my preferences were met with cold resistance from Susan and frustrating neutrality from David. The more I tried to adapt, the more isolated I felt within my own walls. It was a routine morning, and I was at the clinic for a regular pregnancy checkup, expecting nothing but good news. But the doctor's face told a different story as he reviewed the ultrasound images. "Lila, it seems there's a significant developmental issue with the fetus. I recommend further tests, but you need to be prepared for all possible outcomes, including the possibility of not carrying to term." The drive home was a blur, and walking into the house, I was met by Susan's scrutinizing gaze. "Well, what did the doctor say?" she demanded, her tone more intrusive than concerned. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's not great news, Susan. There are complications. The baby might not make it." Susan's reaction was cold, almost mechanical. "I see. Well, you need to think about what's best, for you and for David. Sometimes these things are for the best." Her words stung, but I had no energy to argue. I needed David, his support more than ever. When he finally came home, I told him everything, the tears I had held back now freely streaming down my face. David looked devastated, but his words were hollow. "I'm so sorry, Lila. We'll get through this. Whatever you need, I'm here." But as the days went on, David's promise felt empty. He seemed distant, retreating into his own world, leaving me to cope with my grief and fear alone. Meanwhile, Susan's true colors came out more vividly than ever. One evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to find some distraction in a book, Susan sat across from me, her eyes sharp. "Lila, you need to think about the future. If this pregnancy isn't going to work out, maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time you and David reconsidered your situation. A childless marriage is bound to fail. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Anger boiled inside me, but before I could respond, David walked in. I looked to him for support, but instead of defending me, he stayed silent. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the day came when the complications of my pregnancy could no longer be managed. The doctors did what they could, but the decision was inevitable. The pregnancy had to be terminated. As I lay in the hospital bed, coming to terms with the loss, the doctor explained the gravity of my condition. "It's going to be difficult for you to get pregnant again," he said with a somber look. Returning home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was drained, not just physically, but emotionally. My heart ached in a way that words couldn't describe. I walked through the door in tears, a mess of grief and broken dreams, hoping, praying for some semblance of comfort from the people who were supposed to be my family. What I walked into was anything but comforting. Susan wasted no time. As soon as she saw my state, her words sliced through the air, cold and sharp. "Well, look at you. I told you, didn't I? You just aren't cut out for this. You can't even manage to have a healthy child." Her cruel words hit me like physical blows. I stood there, stunned into silence, my tears falling faster. I looked to David, desperate for him to say something, anything in my defense. But David was distant, his eyes avoiding mine. He shifted uncomfortably, then said, "Look, Lila, I have important matches coming up. I can't have all this drama around. It's just too much." I stared at him, disbelief clouding my pain. Our child was not just some drama, David. This was our baby, our future. How can you be so cold? David's face hardened. "I'm tired, Lila. Tired of your complaints and all these problems. I've got a career, and honestly, I've got plenty of options." He paused, his voice dropping as he added, "Maybe it's better if we just end this. I need someone who fits into my life, not complicates it." Susan clapped her hands, a twisted smile on her face. "Finally. Some sense from you, David." "Lila, you heard him. Pack your things. It's time for you to leave." David didn't help me with my bags, he didn't even say goodbye. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of that click echoed in my heart. When I arrived at my parents' house, my tears hadn't stopped. Seeing me in such a state, Dad was furious. "What happened, Lila? Tell me everything," he demanded, his voice a mix of concern and anger. Through sobs, I recounted everything, how Susan and David had treated me, the cruel words, the demand that I leave the house we shared. Dad's face turned red with each detail I shared, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is not going to stand, Lila. We're going to make sure you get what you deserve," he said, pulling out his phone to make a call. Within hours, he had lined up meetings with some of the best lawyers in the city. The next few days were a whirlwind. We met with a sharp and determined lawyer named Helen, who was appalled by my story. "We'll file for divorce immediately and sue for half of every investment you made in that house," she declared, her tone fierce and resolute. True to her word, Helen moved quickly. The divorce papers were served to David, and the lawsuit for my share of the house investments was filed. David and Susan were shocked. As the legal battle ensued, it became clear that they were in a precarious financial situation because of my mother-in-law's ill-considered spending. David and Susan were forced to sell the house. Meanwhile, David's life seemed to spiral. He met a young fan, a girl who was smitten with the shining star, and married her hastily. I heard about the wedding through friends. It didn't sting as much as I thought it would. Instead, it felt like confirmation that leaving him was the right decision. But Susan couldn't resist one last jab. A few weeks after David's rushed wedding, I received a letter from her. Inside was a photo from the wedding, showing Susan beaming next to David and his new wife. On the back, Susan had written a note. "Finally, my son has found a young and healthy woman who will give birth to healthy children for him." The cruelty of her words was meant to wound, and it did, but not as deeply as she intended. The lawsuit dragged on, but eventually, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded half of the investment we had made in our former home, a sum that significantly strained David's finances further. 2 years have rolled by since I last walked out of that house, feeling broken and betrayed. A lot has changed since then, especially for me and my dad's company. We've been breaking into the international market, and my work paid off in a big way. I received an international award in IT technology, a recognition that came with a prize of $1 million. Just when I thought things were settling down, my phone rang. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize at first, but the voice that greeted me was unmistakably Susan's. "Lila, you need to come back to David," she stated bluntly, "no hellos, no how have you been." I paused, taken aback. "Susan? Why would you think I'd come back?" Her voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. "David's been injured, a bad accident during a match. He's in a wheelchair now, can't play anymore. His wife left him, took half of everything. We need you." Her words were a jolt, but not enough to shake the foundation I'd rebuilt. "And you think I should return because of his injury? Why, Susan? Just because I have money now?" She didn't hesitate. "You're rich now, Lila. You can afford to take care of him. And me. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'll even cook for you and let you have children, imagine that." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Susan, do you hear yourself? You want me back as some sort of nursemaid to David and his financial backer to you, just because I won money? It's always about money with you." Susan's voice cracked, angry and sharp. "You owe us, after everything." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. "I owe you nothing, Susan. I built my life again from scratch, without any help from you or David. You threw me out when I was at my lowest. Why would I ever think of coming back?" There was a silence on the other end, heavy and thick. Then Susan spat out, "You're making a huge mistake, Lila." "I made my mistakes, Susan, but I learned from them. And returning to a life that nearly broke me isn't a mistake I'll make twice," I replied, my voice calm and steady. Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of freedom. Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. I was truly free, and my life was my own. Looking around my office, filled with awards and the buzzing of computers, I knew I was right where I was meant to be. Later, at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony, looking out over the city lights. The challenges of the past seemed like distant memories, and the future was bright and full of promise. I had found success and contentment in my work, and I was surrounded by people who valued and respected me. As I sipped my wine, I thought about Susan's call, her voice so filled with anger and desperation. It was clear that in her world, money still dictated worth. But in my world, I measured wealth not by dollars in the bank, but by the happiness and peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. One crisp morning, as I walked into the office, the buzz of the upcoming product launch was palpable. My team, a group of brilliant and driven individuals, greeted me with enthusiastic updates. "Lila, we're almost ready to roll out the new software. Just a few tweaks left," Jenna, one of our lead developers, informed me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "That's great to hear, Jenna. Make sure those tweaks are solid. We can't afford slips, not with so much riding on this," I replied, my tone both encouraging and firm. Jenna nodded, her demeanor serious. "Absolutely, Lila. We're on it." I received a call from Dad later. His voice was brimming with pride. "Lila, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Not just for your success at the company, but for how you've handled everything life threw at you." "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear that from you. I couldn't have done it without your support," I responded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You did the heavy lifting, kiddo. I was just here to offer a hand when you needed it," he said, and we both laughed. That evening, as I walked through the park on my way home, I felt a deep sense of peace. I stopped for a moment, taking in the beauty of the setting sun, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was moments like this that I had once thought were lost to me forever. But here I was, standing strong, the master of my fate once more. I had faced betrayal and loss, fought back against those who sought to bring me down, and emerged not just unscathed but stronger. As I resumed my walk, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to use my experiences to help others who might be facing their own battles. Perhaps a foundation, something that could offer support and strength to those in need.